Welcome back to Worst Seats in the House. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta. Thanks for everybody coming out on this beautiful, whatever day today is, Wednesday night.
It's the day in between games.
Yeah, I know. I was actually worried as I was driving down here. I'm like, it's so gorgeous out. Everybody's running along the river. I'm like, God, I hope people come to the show. But thanks for coming out here to Elsie's. Thanks for Anthony to making it 4 minutes early. That's the earliest that you've ever come to a show, Anthony.
Always on time.
Yep. So appreciate that.
I was just across the river doing my homework for tomorrow.
I just hung out across the river for a couple hours. You know where I did the other day, though? I went with Louie on Monday. Phone rings at like 11 p.m. on Sunday night. So I just gotten back from the game, I think. And phone rings and he's like, "You want to go to Balsam Lake tomorrow?" I'm like, he had to like assess some contractors, so I think he needed some muscle. So I went over. I went to his cabin. They're doing a big expansion on one of their cabins there. But I got the full Lunani experience. We met up at Lindstrom, had breakfast at the Swedish Inn, then drove over to Balsam Lake, hung out with the contractors for a while. We're there for about like 5 minutes in the expanded home, then sat in his home for a while. And then his builder, me and him went to lunch, and just listening to Louie talk to the builder, very, very funny stuff.
He's been known to be a good deal maker.
Yes, he is. They were telling some stories, man.
Yeah, I think I told the story on our show before about the day I went to visit a friend of mine who has a cabin not too far down the lake from him. And we got on the lake, and I didn't know that was the same lake where Louie had a cabin. And my buddy says, "Hey, your buddy Louie has a cabin on this lake." I said, "Really?" And I texted Louie. I said, "Hey, we're rolling." I didn't know he was up there or anything. It was just a random day in the middle of the summer. I texted him. I said, "Hey, it turns out we're on your lake." And he said, "Right now, we'll stop by." And so he directs us into his place. He's out waving on the dock as we come in. And we wound up touring his place. His daughter-in-law whips up this spread of fresh veggies and stuff from their garden. Yep. And we ended up sitting around the table, hearing stories, drinking wine for probably 4.5 hours. And all of a sudden my buddy turns to me, he said, "We've got like 10 people meeting at our cabin and you're making dinner for everybody. So we better get going. Otherwise we probably would have been there all night." But it was the same thing. The story, we got this wood from this house was being sold in Boston. So I called the guy. We had this guy we knew had a truck. So we called this guy, said we'd give him this everything in the place was some kind of deal he had made with somebody to somehow get it there.
It was fascinating listening to his builder talk. Like, it's a whole different world that I'm not used to. And then every time I'm with Louie, he tries to convince me to like buy a cabin on the, I don't know if he thinks I just have unlimited means, but he's like, "Oh, you can buy that cabin, this cabin, and this cabin." I'm like, I don't know. Yeah. But then I always leave there like, oh my God.
As we were sitting there that day, he was like, "You should buy one of these places." And I was like, "Louie, right now my bank account's got about 4 less zeros on it than yours does. So our money's going straight to St. John's, St. Ben's for college tuition at this point. We'll talk in a few years."
It was a fun afternoon, that's for sure, and morning. But yeah, it just came out of the blue. I still don't really totally understand why he wanted me to come with him, because it's not like I was going to add any sort of intimidation factor. But it was funny as we're sitting at the I forget the name of the restaurant we were at.
In Balsam Lake?
Yeah.
Well, there's only like 4.
I know. It'll come to me. It was a bar. Everybody a working man there, and then me. Not a working man. And finally, Louie
I was about to say, well, you changed a light bulb once, but you didn't. You had to call for help.
Well, that's the funny thing. It's like I just had to bring over a buddy of mine to like install some smoke detectors. So I can't do much.
Right, which requires a battery.
Yeah. This one...
You have to put the plus on the one side, the minus on the other. It's complex.
Yeah. No, I bought these are battery-less now.
Oh, perfect.
So anyway, but we're sitting there, and finally Louie just takes a big swig of his beef barley soup, and he goes, "So when's this thing going to be done?" And let's put it this way, it's going to be done now earlier than was originally scheduled.
Well, the complex they have there's unbelievable.
Yeah.
I don't know if you went through all the houses
No. Well,
and
I've stayed there once. In fact, I've done a podcast. I don't know if it was a Worst Seats podcast or the Straight from the Source, but I did a podcast from his back patio
I remember
once.
that.
And remember that? I feel like it was a Worst Seats that just you were off that week.
I think it was.
And as we're doing the podcast, all of a sudden, just some guy goes strolling along on a pontoon and just starts screaming, "Louie!" as we're sitting there, and he's just eating some off a charcuterie board, waving to just random people on the lake. So it was a fun day. Let's talk about the Minnesota Wild. Much needed victory yesterday. That is for sure. And against the Colorado Avalanche after losing to one of the worst teams in the league in the Pittsburgh Penguins a couple days before, in a game where the Wild probably should have won. But, last night got off to a real slow start, but defended impeccably. Such a shame that they gave up that one goal. And then they played Keepaway the entire overtime. I don't know if I've ever seen an overtime where a team had the puck as much as the Wild without even trying to shoot. And it was like I don't know if it was a John Hines thing or if it was just a Brock Besser, Matt Boldy thing.
Don't let them get the puck.
It's like, let's do everything possible not to give Natchez, McCarr, and McKinnon the puck. And it worked.
Faber, though, not Brock Besser. Those are for you there.
I was talking about.
Still thinking trade deadline.
No, I'm thinking about 3 months from now.
I think but I thought what was crazy is they had the puck for probably 4:15 of the overtime, and yet the best 3 chances in the overtime were for Colorado.
and that's why, if this was part of me wonders, did Faber and Boldy meet each other before the draw and be like, this is what we're going to do. Just keep on throwing the puck out of the zone, because even when the one attempt that Zuccarello made, all of a sudden he realized, why did I do that? And he hustled.
It was actually a strange time to shoot the puck.
Yeah. And he hustled, got that puck and threw it right out of the zone. And it's truly, as I joked with an Avs fan on Twitter, so Sunday I leave for the GM's meetings for 3 days in Palm Beach. If they play it they have so far shown no motivation to change the overtime rules to the over and back thing that I actually think that they should do. But if they showed that video at the GM's meetings, I bet you all the GMs be like, all right, we're changing the rules. Because there was a good example of the Wild needed the point. They probably knew that the way to win that game was to just get to a shootout, and it worked. Again, conscious or not.
Yeah, I'd like to see something changed where if you give away the zone with the puck, but I don't know what you do. Then is it just a face-off back?
I don't think you could call a penalty, but if you keep on throwing the puck over the red line, maybe.
Yeah, it's got to be something because teams are all doing it now where it's.
But this was to the nth degree.
And the idea when they went to 3-on-3 from 4-on-4 was that you'd just see chance after chance after chance. And if this team gets a chance, the other team gets a puck, it's going to be odd man rush going the other way. And you very rarely see it. When it happens, it's exhilarating. It's so much fun to watch. I think they have to do something with it. I know I asked Gary Bettman about it this was last November when we were in Sweden, and I did our interview with the commissioner. And I said, this is one thing that I hear a lot of fans talk about, the fact that they find overtime getting more and more boring. And he kind of rolled his eyes at me like it was a dumb question. But I hate the shootout, and I'm starting to lose interest in the 3-on-3 because of the way teams play.
Well, that's the thing. Could you imagine if they extended overtime to 10 minutes, or 7 minutes, like a lot of the players want? If that went on for 2 or 3 more minutes?
10 minutes, it would probably be harder to do that.
100%.
And it would now. Yeah. And right now, most of the games are being decided in the overtime.
Yes.
There are fewer and fewer games going to shootout, which I like. But I just think that's one way you could add some excitement to that part of the game, make it be more like the wide open flow of chances.
The Wild, the last several overtimes have been outstanding. And
won 7 in a row.
Yeah, exactly.
In games that have gone past regulation.
And to me, that's why that was excessive. It's something we haven't seen before. And granted, we know that Kaprizov and Brodin and Eriksson are out, 3 guys that play in overtime. But it almost seemed like a conscious decision by them, like a strategy.
Well, how about the fact that he only used 2 groups of 3?
It was
the
crazy.
Entire overtime never went to any. Usually you might see Kaprizov get double shifted, Eriksson get double shifted, but they're rotating other guys. Yeah. They went 2 groups of 3, and that was it.
So I was watching the game at home. I did not cover the game, and when he went with the 6 guys in overtime, and he pretty much didn't play the 4th line in the 3rd period, I was just like, they're canceling practice today. Yeah, baby. And I knew I would have a day off. And they essentially had a very limited optional today. And frankly, with them playing every other day, essentially for the rest of the season, there's going to be maybe a handful of practices the rest of the way.
And the what's weird about it, though, is that they have to agree to, it's 4 in a month, that they have to give the guys a scheduled off day where they know right now what their days are going to be in April so that they can make their plans. So then when you cancel a practice that was originally on the schedule, you really are saying we're not going to practice all week because they already had a scheduled off day this week.
Yeah, absolutely. And that was Monday. Right? Monday? Yes. Which was the day, you know, like that Sunday game was, you knew it was going to be tough, but it was unfortunate the way that game was so winnable the other night against a really poor Pittsburgh team.
Yeah. Wes and I talked about this on the broadcast last night. It's the second time they've done it where they've come home from the West Coast on an off day.
Yeah.
So spend the day traveling. And I mean, look,
remember earlier this year in Chicago when they had no legs?
Right. It was the same thing.
Oh, that's the one you're talking about.
And they also had one coming home where they played Edmonton.
Yeah.
But the one in Chicago was an earlier start. I think it was a 5:00 start on a Sunday in Chicago where there was no morning skate. Same with this one. No morning skate after you traveled the whole day the day
Clocks
before.
Moved up an hour.
Right. There were a lot of reasons why you could expect them to
the
be
problem
less
with
than
that game
100%.
is it wasn't legs. It was just poor play.
But sometimes that can be fatigue.
Yeah.
And I thought they just looked tired. I thought they looked tired and lifeless.
But you know, a much needed win. Obviously, it just feels like they're going to have to pretty much win these games. But you know, these games very low scoring until they get the cavalry back. I really do believe that of all these injuries, one that's really hurting them right now is Brodin. Like, he is just so good at getting the puck out of the D zone, and that's where they are really struggling lately. Like they're you know, pucks and skates, and they just, you know, and Chisholm and, you know, the numbers for Chisholm and Spurgeon have been outstanding, but
because Spurgeon's been absolutely on top of his game. It is unreal.
Well, how about the play in Vancouver the other day when Chisholm turns the puck over in front of his net and almost killed Spurgeon?
Exactly. And how about the other one where he turned it over and Spurgeon had to come out and make this sprawling block from the corner? And it was like, what? I mean,
I think that's the one I'm talking about.
Well, he had another one where Chisholm just threw it in his skates, and all of a sudden Spurgeon's looking backward and got blasted in front of the net. But we've talked a lot about how Spurgeon brings out the best in whoever his partner is, and how he makes Jake Middleton look like a top 4 defenseman on a lot of nights, where Middleton on other nights can look a lot less than a top 4 defenseman. And I think he's doing that quite often with Chisholm, but there are limits to even what he can do. Their numbers, I think I've got it. I just finished the graphic for tomorrow night. I think it's the last 5 games. They are number 1 in the NHL among D-pair for expected goals for when they're on the ice. Number 1 out of anybody. And that includes Middleton and Faber. And they're on the list. I think they're like 7th or 8th or something. But those two guys, it's been Spurgeon.
Yeah,
who's been
since
terrific.
Brodin, I saw Brett Marshall tweeted this out today. Since Brodin's been hurt, Spurgeon has not been on. Spurgeon and Chisholm have not been on the ice for an even strength goal against. But Jake Middleton in Vancouver and yesterday, I thought, has been awesome. And this guy, you know, the one thing that I love about Jake Middleton is it takes what happened to his wrist to knock him out of the lineup. This guy plays through so much pain on a team where clearly some guys are not able to. And you know, what happened to him early in that Vancouver game, like, probably should have knocked him out of the lineup for a month if he was anybody else. And he's clearly not healthy right now. And yet he's, you know, the guy is a gamer, man. Yeah,
and he came back early the last time around because everybody else was hurt. I thought he was mediocre at best in Seattle. I thought he was really good in Vancouver. I thought he was absolutely terrific against Colorado.
Right.
I thought he was great in that game. Made some plays with his feet, was able to shut down some plays with speed against McKinnon and Makar that when the play started, I thought, here we go. And all of a sudden he was able to close. I just thought it was one of his better games of the year.
And he's got to be good right now because Faber is spent. He's played a lot of hockey. He's
and he made some decisions in yesterday's game that were strange.
Right.
Tried to leap to get the puck the one time when it went over his head. It was a 2-on-1 in a 1-0 game at the time. And I do think the wear of not just the minutes, but also the type of minutes and having to play them every single night because somebody's always been out of the lineup.
And the 4 nations. I mean, you know, everybody else went to Turks and Mexico and all those places. And he's, you know, I know what everybody looks at as like, well, he only played 4 games in 12 days, but they're practicing every day. It was,
and he was playing 29 minutes against the best players in the world.
Exactly. Like I think that just to get emotionally re-engaged is also could be exhausting. You lose at midnight Eastern time against McDavid and those guys, and then you're playing an afternoon game in Detroit, and it's just been nonstop since. And I just think that right now they are going to have to really impress upon Faber to not practice on these optional days. Like, they've got to almost force him to stay off the ice, and I think that would be a very smart thing for them to do right now.
And they got to get 25 healthy.
Yeah.
Because when those 4 are all in the lineup, now you take a lot of that burden away from everybody.
I'll tell you one thing. I don't know if it's like a lack of pasteurized milk in Karlstad, Sweden, or what it is, but the fact that Brodin and Eriksson Ek, every time they block a shot, seem to break something is a bit of a issue.
Worst run of bad luck that you can imagine.
Like, they need to give him some blood tests, make sure they have enough calcium.
I don't know,
in their
but
body.
then remember, Eriksson Ek broke his foot a couple of years ago and wanted to be on the ice like 3 days later.
That's also part of the problem,
right? It's not a lack of pain tolerance issue for him, and this one, they don't even know when he broke it.
Yeah, I mean, when were we in Seattle and I asked John Hines and he called it a usage injury, that tells me that he went to the Four Nations probably injured.
Well, think about when he came back from it. The game in Detroit might have been his best game of the year. Looked like he was refreshed. He was fast. He made a couple plays. Then he practices the whole next day. I mean, it's just strange how it came to be. But I suppose if you, who knows? I don't even know exactly what he's dealing with. But if you had something that was compromised, and all of a sudden you don't know, it could just be a quick start or stop that knocks it loose or displaces it in some way, and now all of a sudden you're feeling pain you haven't felt before. We know him well enough to know that no matter what he's dealing with, if there's any way for him to be on the ice, he's going to be on the ice. He's shown that, proven that, and so they just can't get these guys back soon enough.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Want to ask you about Justin Brazeau in this trade. I mean, they're obviously not using him. I think you and I, sometimes when you hear players are traded to the Wild and somebody else says that they were one of the worst skating forwards that they've ever seen, we kind of roll our eyes and we're like, well, let's see it for ourselves. He's got a very awkward stride. I mean, there's not a lot of foot speed here. And I think one of the biggest concerns with this trade that I have is they've taken a team that wasn't the fastest and fleetest of foot already, and they've really slowed it down, because now you put him on a line with Trenyon, and he's making Trenyon look like a really good player right now. I mean, he just does not look like he just doesn't. Like, he looks to me like they traded 2 guys for a player that's going to be scratched in game 1 of the playoffs.
Yeah, and I didn't know much about him when they acquired him. I mean, I didn't remember him from the games against Boston that the Wild had played. I looked up his numbers. He had scored in the American League. He had scored a little bit the first half of this year in the NHL. And I talked to Louie about him, who watches a ton of Boston games because Vinny's been in their organization this year. And he said he's got great hands. He's able to make plays around the net. I dismiss a little bit the first couple games because he had the 13-hour travel day to get to Vancouver to play. And so you can't expect a guy to really be moving much that night. Then they had the day we talked about where the next day, fly all day, get home, no morning skate, playing afternoon games, still probably adjusting to everything that's happened. But I thought, now it should all be equal by the time he faced Colorado last night. Not that was the best of the 3 he's played, but probably too early to say, he's a worthless piece for this club. We'll wait to see what he might be able to bring, but so far he hasn't shown much.
Yeah, they're loving him in Boston so far, Huzadinov, but as we both know, that sometimes he can tease with your
both
speed.
Of his goals when the season's over.
But the thing with Brazeau that just concerns me is that on this team, especially when they're healthy, he's not getting on the power play. He's totally miscast for the 4th line. He's a 6'6" finesse player. Like, he's not a physical force. So I just don't get the purpose of the trade. Unless it was a trade like we've talked about on the last podcast and frankly the last little while, that clearly they weren't going to qualify Lauko, that they think that he's got some serious long-term issues with whatever he's dealing with, his hip and his groins. And maybe, again, you trade Huzandinov, you're doing that in part because you're trying to create roster spots in the future for Urov and players like that. They're going to be signing Boyum here whenever DU's season ends. But again, I don't know. I don't know if this was the best use for a team that's not the
who
fastest
knows what
anyway.
could have been out there for Russo and LaPanta, but I think they looked at a guy a lot like they looked at Connor Dewar, where his ceiling might be as a fourth line guy. And where Dewar brought some value on the penalty kill, Russo and LaPanta hadn't shown that.
Yeah.
And in fact, he had been a big culprit for part of the reason why the kill was struggling.
The biggest concern that I have with the rationale of making the Brazeau trade is you're doing it in part because the Trenyon trade just hasn't worked out. And the Trenyon signing just hasn't worked out. And the Trenyon signing still to me is perplexing because you're giving him more money than it would have taken to re-sign Duhaime and Dewar together. So, and those are two fast players. So I don't know. There have been a couple moves here that I just feel have really, in a way, set the franchise back.
I do think Trenyon I thought he had more to give, and maybe he does. He hasn't had a great year.
No, and now they have a guy on a 4-year, $14 million deal playing 7 minutes a night on the fourth line.
I never thought he was going to be a 15-minute guy, but I thought he was going to be a third or fourth line guy. That there were flashes earlier this year. I was just talking to a couple scouts last night at the game that on the Wild's kill, when they had a little bit of run where it looked like they were getting some traction, where he and Foligno were good together, standing up with their wingspan at the line. We've seen some flashes of when he gets moving. And I know
the awesome
John
goal he
Hines
scored in Washington.
And John Hines has said, that's what I saw more often when they had him in the Nashville organization. And I don't know, for whatever reason, it's been sporadic, to say the least, here. And maybe there's still more there, and we'll see more of what they thought they were getting when they signed him.
One quick announcement before we go to break, but two quick announcements. March 20th, 7 p.m., the Wooden Sticks podcast is live at Insight Brewing with Kevin Gorg. Guess who the special guest is, Anthony? You.
Me?
No, me.
Oh. I was going to say, I don't recall being asked about this, but sure.
I think you should come up.
When is it?
Anyway. March 20th, 7 p.m., Insight Brewing, me, Gorg, and you. Do you think it'd be cool?
Oh, boy.
The funny thing, I was actually looking at the dates today because that's the day I get back from the GM's meeting. We actually might need to do a podcast that day also. So I might be at your house. We can do one there. Yeah, we'll do one there. We'll have Gorg as a special guest. The other thing, a huge announcement here is that quarterly, we're going to be doing something called the Talk North Sports Report live show. It's going to be awesome. And don't miss the first ever one. Again, the Talk North Sports Report live show. It's on Wednesday, March 26th at Parlay Kitchen and Bar in downtown Minneapolis. Join Mark Rosen as he makes his big debut on the Talk North Network as he sits down with John Krasinski, Lavelle E. Neal III, Jim Sue Han, and yours truly for an all-star conversation about everything Minnesota sports, from the Wolves and Wilds playoff push to the start of the Twin season and the Vikings free agency and draft news. I should be really good input into the latter, right?
You can weigh in on all those subjects.
Yeah, I think I'll be huge on the Vikings draft. The show kicks off at 7 p.m., so come for the insights, stay for the amazing food and upscale sports bar vibe at Parlay Kitchen and Bar. The Talk North Sports Report is presented by Giggly THC Drinks, offering bold flavors, real fruit juice, and low-calorie options, the perfect drink for your next game night. See you there. We'll be right back. The weather is warming up, and that means it's time to put your augers away, and it's time to grab the boat. Let Onyx Fish help you find the next best bite. The Fish app offers the most comprehensive fishing tool for increasing your success. Use the Fish app to find new places to fish and sort lakes by species, abundance, trophy, and keeper potential. Onyx Fish also shows you hotspots, lake-by-lake regulations, and private and public land ownership information. Download Onyx Fish on the App Store or go to onyxmaps.com/fish to get more information about the app that is changing the game.
There are many reasons to open a smart checking account at Royal Credit Union, including no monthly fees, no minimum balance, and a $250 bonus. Getting your $250 is easy. Open your account by May 31st, receive 2 payroll direct deposits of $200 or more, and you'll get a $250 bonus. See details and open your account today at rcu.org/checking bonus. No minimum balance required to obtain bonus. Offer ends 5/31/25. Insured by NCUA.
Hey, have you been dreaming of a lake cabin lifestyle with boating, fishing, and family fun in northern Minnesota? Well, lately I've thought a lot about how cool it would be to have a getaway like so many Minnesotans. And if you're like me, you probably think that owning your own lakeside getaway is beyond your budget.
Well, if you think lake cabin real estate prices keep going up, well, think again. This is Russo, and I'm here to tell you there is an affordable way to enjoy a cabin lifestyle and all that goes with it. And yes, I said affordable. I founded a Clamshell Beach Resort, which is located on the Whitefish chain of 14 lakes for you and your family to enjoy. Here's how. Clamshell has lake homes that offer deeded fractional ownership, and the keywords there are deeded and fractional. You own it. Imagine having 5 weeks a year to enjoy Clamshell with its beaches, pool, and lodge that's full of kids' activities. Is golf your game? There's a great golf course right across the road. Like winter sports? Well, you can go ice fishing, cross-country skiing, or snowmobiling right out the door at Clamshell. And there's no maintenance, no grass mowing, no snow removal. It's done all for you. And you can own a share of Clamshell Beach Resort at an affordable price. To learn more about ownership opportunities at Clamshell Beach Resort, go to cottagesonwhitefish.com or contact Pat Egan at 612-220-9819. That's cottagesonwhitefish.com or Pat Egan at 612-220-9819.
Back here, worst seats in the house. Michael Russo, Anthony LaPanta, live from Elsie's. We got Leighton up here. What's up?
Well, about
Nice jacket.
Believe it or not, this is what I wore to work. So, but about the Brazeau trade, I don't think there's anything to really say about Brazeau yet. He hasn't played enough and hasn't given much a chance. But do you think there was a chance that Husnudinov, who had never been in the American League his entire career here, was asking for a trade after he got sent down?
I don't think so. If that is the case, I think I would find out just because of people close to Husnudinov who I'm tight with. I think this came as a shock to him. Now, I will say I don't think he actually, if he reported to Iowa, I think it was more gonna happen, and because he didn't play a game in Iowa, I don't believe, right? But I don't think he asked for a trade. I think this was more that the Wild just felt like he was not going to be the player that they thought he would be when they drafted him. I guess my biggest concern there, and maybe they're right, is that, and Anthony and I have been pretty, I think, honest on all our podcasts about our feelings of what type of player we had seen from him, but he had never got a shot, to your point, down in Iowa. And so you just know that he's an unfinished product, and you do wonder if they maybe sooner should have just sent him down there, had him play with the puck. You're playing on the fourth line situations, and just, put him on power play, teach him how to kill down there rather than up here where he was not good. And so you just wonder, to trade a 22-year-old for a 27-year-old that I'd be very shocked at this point if they're going to re-sign. It's one of those trades that actually could bite them. It really could.
How does it bite you, though? It
could bite you if
Husnudinov
could have
turns
used
into
him,
anything, and we're
or
talking
you
about
could
a
have
guy.
traded him for something better.
Yeah, maybe, but that's what I was saying earlier. Is we don't know what potentially was out there in exchange for him. But we're talking about a guy who hadn't scored elsewhere in his career before he got to the NHL. We're talking about a guy that what did he play? 60 games with the Wild this year. I think he had 30 shots on goal. He was getting like a shot every other night. We're not talking about a guy that was snake bitten or something. I mean, he generated nothing, didn't show a propensity to help on the penalty kill. And maybe once every 3 games, he'd have a fast spurt where you'd say, whoa, look at, he can skate.
But again, my point is that as a organization that likes to pride itself on developing and baking guys in the minors, they never gave him that opportunity. For a guy that came here. Like, I get it. You signed him last year. You put him on the team right away. But there was no reason why he had to necessarily make the team out of camp. Or there was no reason why in November or December and all these
this
times.
This year, though, they were a little limited with what, I mean, he knew the guys that he had to beat out were the guys like Shore and Gaunce and Jones. I mean, there wasn't enough space on the roster to really push him. I think that's part of the problem. But I agree with you. Maybe if he had spent half a year in Iowa, we would have seen a different player. I don't know. Yeah.
I just think that we're looking at him, also to your point we're like judging Brazeau on 3 games of playing 7 minutes a night, if that. I just think that Husnudinov, to trade him away before like giving him the full allotment of a development accrual that most guys get, unless you are the tip of the iceberg good. I mean, guys like Marco Rossi and Matt Boldy had to play in Iowa, and Marat Husnudinov had not. It just makes very little sense to me, and I don't care about his KHL out clause. If If sending him to Iowa for 3 weeks or a month is going to make him say, I want to go back to Russia, sayonara, or whatever that word would be in Russian.
Do you think it's going to make him slow play with other like future guys?
It depends on the guy. Like they'd never have given up on somebody that they saw talent. Like Marco Rossi hadn't scored in the NHL either, but they knew they had something with him. So they put him in Iowa for a season or most of a season. They weren't going to give up on him. But these guys watch players and evaluate talent for a living. And I think they looked at this guy and said, the best he's ever going to be in the NHL is a fourth liner. I think it's the same way they looked at Connor Dewar and Brandon Duhaime last year and said, love the kid, love the guys. Players loved him. We liked him. But he's never going to be more than a fourth liner. We get a chance to pick up a couple mid-range draft picks for the two of them, so let's do it.
Right. And then they go and replace them with a more expensive Trenyon who's on their fourth line right away.
Those draft picks are. Those are assets that they've since used in other deals.
It is interesting. The pick they got for Maroon from Boston, I didn't realize until the other day they sent it back to Boston to take Lauko. So, by the way, they love Lauko in Boston. It's hilarious. And it was interesting. Joe Sacco was talking yesterday about just how much faster they are since the deadline. You know, guys like Kuzendinov and Lauko there, and all of a sudden, Middlestat there. Yeah, Letary there playing really well right now. It's kind of interesting. And they might make the playoffs suddenly. By the way, I was just thinking this today. I was just thumbing through, we get the email every day with everybody's strength of schedule.
Games that are left, yep.
Have you looked at the St. Louis Blues schedule?
We
keep on talking about Calgary, Vancouver. Blues might make the playoffs. They got the easiest schedule in the league.
We showed this last night on the broadcast. We went through St. Louis, so we included Utah as well,
right,
with the remaining schedule. And everybody was about 50-50 playoff to non-playoff opponents. The Blues only have 5 games against current playoff teams left on their schedule. So it's possible. That's why this game on this homestand against St. Louis is a big game.
Yeah. Knuckleheads, huge loss for them last night at home against Montreal. I thought they were terrible against the Wild. That was such a shame the Wild didn't come out with
those.
They
deserve better there. Canucks play Calgary, I think, tonight.
I mean, how many times did Vancouver ice the puck in the third period? That had to be 6-7 times.
It was unbelievable.
Yeah, it was crazy.
And yet then they get one bounce and puck's in the net.
Yep. Do you have another question?
One more about like the D. So there's no left pair third. There's no third pair left side defenseman signed for next year. Could anyone, in your opinion, move to the left side and make room for Jiricek? And if not, do you think they're going to re-sign Merrill? Because he's actually played pretty well, I think, this year.
Yeah, I would be surprised. I mean, Chisholm's an RFA. It's going to be dependent on what they want to pay him and what he's willing to take for his role. You're going to have Boyum. He's going to be signed. It's whether or not he's going to be ready. He's going to be ready this year to maybe burn that first year of the deal, but does he make the team out of camp? They're probably going to have to sign some sort of defenseman. But I don't know if Bogo's going to be back. To me, you got to say to him, work all summer on playing the offside, because they've got to give up what they gave for Jiricek, which included Damon Hunt, who would probably at this point have 25 games in the NHL with Brodin, the number of times he's been hurt since the trade. They've got to figure out a way to get Jiricek in the lineup. And unless Spurgeon's being traded or going to retire out of the blue, which I would doubt, you're not giving up $15 million. I just don't see how you don't create a roster spot for him. And for that, to your point, it's got to be Bogo that moves to the left, because you're not going to take a 21-year-old and say, learn the left side. You want to put him in the best position to succeed, right?
Probably. And I think John Merrill's been good this year, but I don't see how. Yeah, I don't see how you make that choice. I mean, Jiricek has to play his way into the lineup.
Yeah. I mean, if John Merrill would take a 1-year deal at $775, would Billy Urin do it? Probably.
And just go with 8 in the NHL all year.
Yeah, or then you with the way that they get hurt.
I think they're going to.
You got to at this point pencil in Brodin for 50 games next year.
And I think because of that, I think they're going to try to find a way to keep Chisholm here.
Yeah.
I think
he's been serviceable, that's for sure.
Right. And
needed.
If he's your third left shot defenseman and maybe Merrill's 4, I mean,
but isn't it amazing the way it always works? They could not get Damon Hunt a spot in the lineup, and here they trade him, and then Brodin just goes injury after injury. So it's just the way it works.
And then I'll leave you with, who would you rather play in the first round?
Vegas.
I don't want nothing to do with Dallas or Colorado. So would you rather play Winnipeg or the top seed in the Pacific?
I total selfishness. I want the top seed in the Pacific, which is going to be Vegas. I mean, even though I think the Wild would really do well against Edmonton, Edmonton right now is 5 points behind Vegas. Vegas never loses at home. I think that after a full year covering the Wild, I earned a trip to Vegas for the playoffs.
Yeah, I actually think the Wild
and hopefully a 7-game series.
I think the Wild match up better with any of the teams except Dallas for some reason. And Colorado with their moves looks like a much more complete club, but they haven't dominated games against the Wild. Like,
I didn't notice Coyle much last night. Did you?
Not much. And I had watched them the night before against Chicago, and he was good. Brock Nelson was good. They're a lot better than what they had, but I still think defensively they're not quite as staunch, and their goaltending is definitely not at the level that Winnipeg's or Dallas. And
it will be interesting.
Maybe not even
I've got to think they're going to try to re-sign Brock Nelson. If he doesn't, I think the Wild obviously will go after him hard. I think the Wild will go after Brock Besser. The one thing that, I think the one thing that Bill Guerin tried to do at the trade deadline is avoid giving up a bunch of assets. And even though if he could have put one of these guys on LTIR, season-ending LTIR, which I still think he could have and probably should have, but he doesn't want to give up picks. And one thing is I think he wants to keep as many bullets in the chamber for this offseason. Like, I still think there's going to be some big trade he makes. And I still keep on looking at Buffalo. Like, I know they love Dylan Cousins, and Dylan Cousins is obviously off the board. The guy I still think is JJ Peterka. Like, I think they love him. I would love him. And the question is, what could you give up to get him? Could it be an Ogren? Would it be something like that? But you got to re-sign him. It would cost him a lot of money. And then what do they do with Rossi at that point?
Yeah, are you talking about in retrospect at this year's deadline?
No. I'm saying that's why I think he didn't want to be too aggressive.
Yeah.
I wouldn't have
given.
I think they are going to make a big trade this summer for somebody. And
the deals at the deadline to me made no sense if you were the Wild. What the price was for those players, and maybe that price will be different in the offseason.
Yeah.
And we'll see. But I think
Peterka, there's no way he is happy in that situation. He's a group two.
Would be?
And I don't know. I love that kid. I've sat down with him at the last 2 NHL media tours in Stockholm and Prague. I'll probably sit down with him in Milan this year. Maybe that'll be a big Wild preview story.
Yeah, I haven't watched enough of his game to know if I know his numbers are decent, but I haven't watched enough to say
the best part of sitting down with these guys in Europe is it's just me there. So it's like you just sit down and you get you get to know these
that
players.
Doesn't make them a more attractive trade chip or anything.
No. But I'm telling you that this kid is a great kid. Wild fans would love him. All right, let's hear about Vinny's thoughts.
Yeah, here's a Vinny's thought for you real quickly before we get to our next question. This is actually kind of interesting. So the trade deadline, the Rantanen deal, the state tax played a part in it again. And this is something he's brought up to us before when we've been sitting around my dinner table. So it's no longer affecting just free agency. Now it's affecting trade deadline deals because supposedly he had made the comment when he got to Carolina that he only wanted to go 4 places. One of them ends up being Dallas, where there's where
I will say his agent
tax.
Andy Scott has denied that being said.
But he ends up signing in a place where state tax adds about $500,000 to the value of the contract that Carolina had offered him more cash. That Colorado had offered him more cash.
Well,
supposedly.
Colorado offered him, I think, $11.75,
and they in Denver they thought at 13. But anyway, but bottom line
that would
is
have been more than McKinnon. They definitely didn't.
But
do that.
bottom line is he takes less to go to Dallas. Do you think there's a way to change this, or that it has to change?
First of all, I am not smart enough to figure this out, but I will tell you that I, again, at both these media tours, both in Europe and in Vegas this past year, sat down with Bill Daly. We've asked him that question, And clearly he has said that there is some mechanism that he has thought about that is interesting. And I have a feeling this will be a topic at this year's GM's meetings. Obviously that wouldn't change anything. It's got to be collectively bargained in with the NHLPA. So it would be, but again, they are starting those CBA negotiations. I think Gary Bettman has made it clear he'd love to announce a new CBA by game 1 of the Stanley Cup Finals. So I do think that this is something that too many people are talking about, that it's going to be.
Well, and I just think when the numbers get bigger, I've always argued that there are other factors too, that, people, quality of life in a city that draws people there.
I covered, trust me, back in the 90s, the Tampa Bay Lightning were a freaking doormat, and nobody was talking about that then. The Florida Panthers didn't win a playoff round from 96 to 2002. Nobody was talking about state income tax then.
And there's
2022.
But there's always been places that were more expensive to live. It costs more to live in New York. So,
but right now, with
now
what's
the
going on in
numbers
Canada,
are getting bigger. So that now all of a sudden, where if you're talking about a contract that was $6 million per instead of $12 million per, it's a smaller number. But to me, it just seems like there's an easy way to do the math and just say that we're going to have a pre-tax cap or something or a post-tax cap, where it's now your cap is after whatever your state income tax is.
I think the always the worry is, like, what if a guy's traded?
Well, then you just his salary cap hit is whatever the number is. And then the taxes get assessed on top of that.
Starting to worry you're going to put this in the Donkey Hockey League.
No.
No.
Nobody wants to play for the Stripes.
But I think the reason why this is such a huge deal now is that it's very clear that teams like Florida, Tampa Bay, Nashville, Vegas, and not so much Seattle anymore, but Dallas are taking advantage of this. And those are the teams with the no state tax. And then you add in, how bad the Canadian dollar is right now, the high taxes in certain areas of Canada, not so much Alberta, which I've learned. And team players do not want to go play in Canada. And, then you add what's going on in New York and California.
Right, and that's always been my point, is that there are other factors too that just aren't dollar for dollar, where it's, I've got a family. I'd like to live in Minnesota during the summer. I'd like to live in a warm climate, so I want to go here. Nobody wants to live in Ottawa, so why would you go? And there's all these other factors too that are hard, that you can't put a hard dollar number on. But the tax is something that seems like you should be able to do an equation.
Should have Lou Nanny here to talk about it.
Yeah, he'd start now and be done on Tuesday.
Yeah.
Hey, I really
my
like the
favorite
show.
thing was about Louis is when he at the Winter Classic, when he was giving that speech, like, us Minnesotans, we love the cold weather, blah blah blah, and then he was on a plane that night to Florida. Anyway,
I really like the show. Thanks for doing this. It's a lot of fun. I have a question about coaching skating. I remember when Juracek came, reading a little bit of what you wrote about Andy Ness, the difference that he might be able to make with a guy like that, who you described as kind of, I think, as a kind of an awkward skater. Or at least that was a weaker part of his game. And now with Brazeau, I haven't heard that mentioned, the Ness factor, but I certainly have heard people talk about his awkward skating. These guys are professionals. They've been skating since they were, 5, 2, whatever. To what extent can a great skating coach like Andy Ness actually make a difference with a skater at this point in their career?
I don't know. Marco Rossi is so much better than, he's changed his edge work and everything about the way his stride. I do think that, David Juracek is somebody that they're going to try to really impress upon, maybe doing what Marco Rossi did and spending the summer here working out with Matt Harder and skating with Andy Ness. And because they've invested so much with him, I think that they'll really have that conversation with him. And my guess is that he'll be smart enough and professional enough to do that. Brazeau is just, probably not, at this point in the season where they're going to have very few practices. Like today, they had an optional practice. I don't know if they had him work with Andy afterwards and things like that. Brazeau, the one thing about him, you do watch him. Clearly he's got hands and things like that. It's just, you just wonder how much work you can do with them at this point and how much they'd be willing to invest on somebody that's clearly a rental.
Well, and how much difference you're going to make between here and the end of the season is limited. But with a summer of work, you can make a difference. And the other role that Andy Ness plays is that he works with a lot of guys as they're coming back from injury. So he'll put them through skating drills for that. His mom, Diane, was a terrific skating coach for years. I think the company was called Pure Edge Power that they ran. But she used to work with high school kids all the time and was pretty hands-on with the Hill Murray program. And it was a big difference for them because these guys, you can improve, and you can improve over a summer. Now, you can't turn David Juracek into Jonas Brodin, but you can turn him into a much better David Juracek with some fundamental work.
Yeah. I before you ask your question, I mean, I don't love the fact that Juracek's up here now playing right now. I get they're defending really well and things like that, and who do you take out of the lineup? But it just like if you're not going to play him, bring up somebody from Iowa.
Right now. I mean, they had to have an extra guy with them on the trip just in case. But now that you're back home and you're here for 7 games in a row, I agree with you. But I wouldn't change the lineup the way it's going right now.
Yeah. And they're when they're defending.
But remember, on the trip there was some, Bogosian missed a game. There was some. They were wondering if other guys were banged up. I know some other guys are dealing with minor injuries, so they had to have them there for insurance.
Question.
Yes, Anthony. Last year you spoke about how the Wild didn't have it to take it deep, and we gave you a hard time for that. And here we are this year. So let's look ahead when we are not handcuffed by the salary cap. I would like some bold predictions from both of you of what that could look like. Like, who would have predicted we'd have one of the best records
this year
for the road record?
Yeah. Well, this year, I think what's interesting about this year is that early, I think they were, I don't know what the right phrase would be, but they were overachieving. They had the best record in the NHL in early December. They weren't the best team in the NHL, and we talked about that a couple times.
Remember the first 7 games of the season, they didn't even trail?
Yeah, right.
It's crazy.
But it was, there were a lot of, not just the eye test, but there were some metrics that I was looking at saying, this isn't going to be sustainable. I think where they are now is about the team they are. It's just been a weird path to get there. And I think this team, and I've said it all along, Billy's plan should be evaluated when next season's opening night hits. Are they legitimately considered one of the teams to beat in the West? And I think they will be. I think the core that they've got built here is legit. They've still got a couple tweaks they have to make to the roster, but I think right now where they sit, they've got the pieces in place to be one of those teams, maybe one of the top 4, 5 going into the season in the West. That's what I think it looks like, because you can have some goofy things happen where maybe the 5th best team gets great goaltending, they stay healthy, and they win it. Maybe the 1st best team doesn't, and they slip. But if you're not one of those 5, it's very rare that like a team that maybe looks like the 8th, 9th bubble team in the West has all the pieces fall into place and they run away with something.
Yeah, and I guess like right now, like I don't think they're magically going to be a contender opening night unless Billy has a big summer. And that was what I meant by our column that I wrote with Joe Smith the other day, and that the pressure's on Billy this summer. It's like, okay, we get you didn't, that there's reasons why you didn't make big moves at the deadline, LTIR notwithstanding. But okay, that's fine. But everybody has been waiting patiently. He bought himself 4 years when he bought out Parisi and Suter. Like nothing was going to happen to him. They've been really good regular season teams here the last 4 years, but this is the 6th season of Bill Guerin, and to this point, they haven't won a playoff round. So, you know, at some point, the honeymoon is over, and this has been a long honeymoon. So now this summer, you know, like, look, nobody expected when they made the Fiala trade that they were getting an $8.5 million defenseman in Brock Faber. So that has eaten into the amount of money that they were going to have to spend this offseason. Nobody expected when we all got a little concerned that after 55 games, they were giving Kirill Kaprizov $9 million on a 5-year deal. Now we look back and I was like, wow, I bet you even they think, man, we wish we signed him to 8. So nobody expected that he would be a $15 or $16 million hockey player this offseason. Doesn't matter what Mikko Rantanen signed. He will make that this offseason if he's wanting to. So that eats into their like, remember the cap only goes to 95 this year. Goes to 104 or 103 in 2 years, and then 113 in 3 years. So there's not unlimited cap space, and that's why this summer, and there's not a great free agent crop this summer. So unless you're getting Mitch Marner to come here, which probably means that Kirill Kaprizov isn't re-signing, but unless you're getting like a Mitch Marner, he's the only star out there right now. So, who, by the way, I actually have grown a great fondness for his game this year watching him. Like, he's been awesome. But regardless,
Did you interview him on the European tour?
No, I didn't. I have interviewed him, but he's
so then we shouldn't sign him.
Yeah. But he did spend a lot of time in Minnesota last summer, and because it's Minnesota, he fell in love with it. But that's why I just think there's going to be some big trade. Like he's got to make some bold.
Yeah,
trade
he'll have a little bit of flexibility to add a piece or two for sure.
And that's why it's like I'm just starting to look at like players like who could that player be? And to me, if you're going to make a big trade, you're going to want to get like a 22-year-old future star, like center type player. And that's why a Peterka might make a lot of sense. And he's the one that's kind of like I'm eyeballing right now. But I'm sure there's other guys as well. But I just have a feeling that Billy's going to, pull something out of his hat this offseason because free agency, especially if Brock Nelson re-signs, is it's just not too exciting. Like even Besser, you really going to get like if it's true that they weren't even getting first round pick offers, Vancouver, which obviously is true or he'd be gone. And they were getting nobody. Clearly his stock is down. He's had a tough year,
Yeah, he has had a tough year, and I'm not sure he's what's missing here.
Right.
I think Nelson helps more with what Colorado gave up. I'm sure they were assuming they would have a chance to re-sign him.
They better. I mean, you give up Calum Ritchie. To your point, like they traded Janela Uralf in a first for Brock Nelson.
Right.
To your point, I mean, Calum Ritchie is going to be a stud. Are you having furnace troubles? Well, winter isn't over yet, so don't let the cold take over. Get fast, reliable repairs and keep your home warm and worry-free by going to Aquarius Home Services. Right now, you can save $98 on furnace, plumbing, or electrical repairs from a company you could trust. Stay comfortable as the seasons change. Trust me, go to Aquarius Home Services. How do you do that? Well, visit AquariusHomeservices.com to get your heat back fast. Again, AquariusHomeservices.com. Aquarius, earning the right to be recommended. And don't forget to mention that Russo sent you.
We love supporting local businesses. We love working with local businesses. I started buying stuff at Twill in the Edina Galleria a long time ago when I started this podcast network. I was really hoping I'd be able to work with Scott Dayton, the founder and owner of Twill, and I was lucky enough to be able to do so. Now my closet is pretty much all Twill stuff. I don't get free stuff. I don't get discounts. I don't ask for discounts. I go there and pay full freight because I want to support a local business also because the stuff is awesome. Just bought a fresh batch. I'm about to go on a vacation with my wife. Everything I'm packing is Twill stuff because it wears well. It's comfortable. It doesn't wrinkle on planes. It doesn't wrinkle in suitcases. It comes out looking good. It wears like iron, and I'm never going to have to replace it. It's just so simple. Everything from casual shoes to dressy shoes to golf stuff to dress stuff to suits. By the way, you get everything tailor fit, which really helps me out. And everything from, gopher stuff to winter stuff to summer stuff. They just have everything. So go to twillmn.com, sign up for email updates. They won't send you anything unless they have a very specific event they want you to know about. They won't spam you. And go in there and say hello. Tell them we sent you. It's just a pleasant group of knowledgeable people. They are experts at what they do. It's the best men's clothing store in Minnesota. Go check out Twill online and in person in the Edina Galleria.
Keep the good times rolling without the regrets. Giggly THC beverages are your go-to for bold flavor and smooth vibes. Zero alcohol and no bad decisions. Just THC-infused cocktails, seltzers, and teas packed with natural ingredients and performance-boosting superfoods like ashwagandha and ginseng. Find Giggly at over 500 locations like Total Wine, MGM, and Cub Foods, or shop online at giggly.com. That's GIGLI.com. Ready to upgrade your drink game? Well, use code GIGLYNORTH for 50% off your first order. Giggly. Sip smarter, feel better.
I came up to talk about Brock, but first...
Which Brock? Faber, Besser, or...
Besser,
okay.
yeah. But
Nelson?
first, we'll go to the accounting part of the state tax. That's only 41 games. The other 41, they're visiting teams, and they pay the tax in that
each
state.
city, yep.
So New York, if you play a lot of games in New York, you can hit hard California.
Right.
So it's a little bit misleading when they throw out the number because you can be sure that they're not.
But your state income tax still comes out all 82 in the city that you're playing. When you travel, you still have to pay a jock tracks. So you're just paying more when you go on the road to wherever you're playing.
Right.
But your overall state income tax is 82 games in the city you play in. So
Well, what's the tax that you're saying? The visiting tax when you go to New York?
Wait, there's still a jock tax when you go to many of the markets that you have to pay.
Okay, I thought doesn't it come off your state tax? In this case, there's no state tax for it to be deducted from.
Well, I don't know what it comes out.
Yeah,
on
I don't know how that part works, but the league I thought had a deal where they just figured that all washed out, so the guys just paid their tax in their own city.
But I know for entertainers that they have to pay that tax.
Right.
And there's, but it came off their local state tax deduction.
If that's the case, that's news to me. Remember who was the kid that was called up in Nashville like 5 years ago that wound up losing money? I can't remember who it was. Like now, like Tennessee's actually, who's got no state tax, their jock tax is through the roof. So, but trust me, I'm not educated on this, nor will I ever be or care to be.
Well, anyhow, back to Brock Besser. I was listening to the Vancouver sports station 650 SN, and those guys had given up on him. They said 8 million at 5 years. That's enough. If he doesn't want that, he had a -20 Corsi. A plus minus of -20 right now. He's had, I believe they said, 0 goals in 9 games and 4 goals in 21 games. And he said he's slow now. He's not the fastest player in the ice, and he's not going to be any faster 5 years from now when the contract's up. So
he needs a change of scenery like I've never seen before.
They did. The one plus was they said he's gone through a few centers that aren't feeding him like he had when he had a better season. But that was. Yeah. It was just an interesting.
Well, the Wild are just swimming in great playmaking centers. You should just come here. That'll
what
fix
I was
them.
getting at is I hope they don't throw Brock an 8-year contract and.
I don't think that happens. Well, they can't give him 8 years. But
seven. But
I don't think
5 would make him 30. He's what, 27, 32.
Yeah, I mean, I heard some of the same comments when we were in Vancouver. And I always talk.
Alvian really kind of threw him under the bus.
Did. Right? And that's what a lot of people were talking about was like the deals he turned down. It really turned the fans against him, and that's why some GMs, even when they're angry during negotiations, are really careful about what they say publicly because they don't want their player to have to live through that kind of stuff.
For what Brock has done for that organization and how loyal he has been, to have a GM stand up and say that in front of the media, true or not. I mean, like, can you imagine if you're Brock Besser and you hear that? I mean, maybe that was what Alvin hoped, is that it would motivate him to play such inspired hockey down the stretch to, prove that he's worthy of, again, an $8 million year deal. But to say that publicly, I just thought was pretty classless. So, and I know, again, you could tell it was just a reaction. I don't even know if Alvin, I wonder if he regrets saying it, but I don't think it was the greatest thing to say. Any other questions here? Nada. What do you think of the rest of the homestand? Rangers here on Thursday night, playing better, had a tough loss the other night in Winnipeg.
The Rangers, first of all, really amazing when you look at their season. I just put the graphic together for tomorrow. First, I don't remember exactly what the numbers are, but first 17 games or 19 games or something like that, they were like the 5th best team in the league, number 3 in goals against, number 3 in goal differential. Then they went through a stretch. It was from early December or late November to mid-January. They were the worst team in the NHL, went 4-15, worst in the league in goals against, worst in the league in goal differential. Now, since then, they're back in the top 10 in all those categories. So they're playing better. I don't know what happened to them in the middle of the year other than bad goaltending, but that's why I brought it up. But the homestand's interesting for Minnesota because you get the Rangers, you get the Blues in what I think is really a big game with St. Louis, as we talked about earlier. Seattle's a team you have to beat. And the Wild are subtly playing a lot better at home. I know we've talked a lot this year about how they couldn't bring the road game home. In the last 6 games at home, they've won 4 of them. Their goals against is like 1.8. Their penalty kills at like 92. They're only taking 1 or 2 or putting the other team on 1 or 2 power plays a night. They're playing a lot more at home like what they've played on the road when they've been successful. So we'll see if that can continue because the way things had gone at home all year, this homestand wasn't looking like a great opportunity to tune up for the playoffs. But now you've got 7 in a row, 10 out of 11 here. There's some tough ones in there, and there's a few that you should win. including the one that started with Pittsburgh that they didn't win. So I think the homestand is, I think it's a key spot for the Wild. And I think I'd be disappointed. I'd be surprised if they didn't solidify their spot by the time
and
this
they have some
homestand is
desperate.
over.
They've got to maximize. They've got to. You've got these desperate teams coming in, like the Blues suddenly are feeling like they have a real
Rangers should be
opportunity.
desperate.
Rangers are going to be desperate, so they've got some big games coming up. To your point, I was watching the Colorado game yesterday, and I felt the exact same way in the second and third periods. Like, this is the road team that we saw earlier in this year. Especially, when I felt it, coincidentally, was the shift before the goal when we watched the Rossi line with Zuccarello and Boldy, with Faber and Middleton just spend a minute and a half in the offensive zone and swarming.
Right.
Like, that was the team
They
that
got
we
a
saw
couple key penalty kills against one of the most
Huge
dangerous
ones.
power plays in the league. It just looked like a team that was committed to play that way at home, which we didn't always see earlier.
And they've got to continue to get better, good goaltending from Gustafsson. We've seen some great ones lately against.
He was great. I thought,
he was
against Colorado.
awesome last night. Any other questions? All you people drove out here to beautiful Minneapolis. Otherwise, we're going to wrap up the show up. We got a taker. We got all this merch here. Otherwise, we're going to have to throw it on eBay.
Oh boy, get big bucks for that stuff.
Couple bucks.
So I've always wondered, you got the NBA, everyone wants to play in the West Coast, the East Coast, and everything.
Mm-hmm.
Same with football, baseball, and everything. I feel like hockey is the one sport where we can kind of get people that want to come to Minnesota. Where do you rank Minnesota on the list of places where they want to play, or who are the top teams that they want to play for in the NHL?
The top teams that I think that right now, and this is regardless of taxes, the destination places are places like Dallas, Colorado, Florida, Tampa Bay, Vegas. Those are the big ones. And it really, obviously, I know it's just because Colorado has state taxes, but those teams are just run so well. But I agree with you. Like, I think Minnesota should be a destination. I think people love to play here. I very rarely hear people that throw Minnesota on their no trade list unless they got a 2018 no trade list.
Patrick Laine.
Yeah.
No, but it's kind of gone in cycles, because there was a time where a lot of guys wanted to come here because they wanted to live here in the summer, wanted to raise their families here. And then there was a little bit of the discord, and it changed a little bit, where we heard a couple other guys that weren't thrilled to come here. But I think now a lot of it is belief that you can win.
Yeah.
And,
but people,
really,
they're still like, people they want to play in LA, New York, places like that. Canada's the one place it's really difficult right now just because of the whole tax situation.
Maybe Toronto.
Yeah.
Guys, a lot of guys, especially Canadian guys, they'd love to go play in Toronto, Montreal if they grew up in Canada. You don't hear a lot of guys who say, even though I grew up in Alberta, I'd like to play for Edmonton.
Yeah.
But
how about Rod Brindamore's comments about, did you read those the other day or listen to them?
Some of them.
He essentially threw his GM and owner under the bus.
Yeah, about not knowing about what Rantanen's belief was.
And then when he started
But
talking
how
about
would you know that?
But then when he started talking about Gensel and how if we had offered Gensel the contract that he got in Tampa Bay, he'd be here right now. No, why didn't we? It was pretty crazy.
Yeah.
You don't normally hear that type of honesty. I think he was in survival mode because people were starting to say that, Mikko didn't love his style of hockey and things like that.
I think the only other thing I'd add to the question is that it's interesting when we get guys that come to Minnesota, we always ask them about what it was like to play against this team. What did it feel like? What did it feel like to come and play in this building? And almost all of them talk about how much they love the atmosphere, thought it was one of the tougher places to play, thought it was one of the toughest teams against whom to play just because of their style. So I think there's a good respect for Minnesota and they've been a playoff team almost every year for a decade and a half.
Yeah. The thing is, I think people love the fact that it's a rabid hockey fan base and that people know the sport. But the one thing in this league right now is that you pretty much are getting sold out buildings in every single market for the most part. And everything's cyclical too. Like, people are going to, trust me, people are going to start to love to play in Utah when they fix that building up. When those three California teams become, like, there was a time where those three California teams it was hard to get wins on the 3-game circuit.
Yeah.
And players
and
loved
remember what the
playing
atmosphere
there.
in San Jose used to
Oh
be?
my
Now
goodness.
now you feel like you're at an American League game.
Yeah, definitely. Any other questions? Otherwise, we're going to wrap up. Come on up. to the mic. Go for it.
Thanks. You guys do a nice job. We appreciate your humor. You got here.
My mom said to me the other day, "Did you and Anthony go to couples therapy? You're getting along too much lately."
So you got here 4 minutes, 2 today instead of 2 minutes or 1 minute.
I think I got
it was
in
56, but we locked that door on him. So I think he was here 5 minutes early.
Yeah, it might have been.
Yeah.
I was just coming from our office in downtown Minneapolis, so it was a little more predictable commute time.
So for everybody here and all the fans, you're very patient with him.
Oh boy!
Congratulations.
Yeah.
So the key question, of course, is that they play professional hockey to win the Stanley Cup.
Mm-hmm.
How many Stanley Cups have we won so far?
I don't know. That
In Minnesota,
defunct-
0. Yeah.
That defunct 2007-8 Northwest Division banners getting awfully dusty up there and lonely. Like it's so ridiculous that they are hiding it on the corner now.
And so the goal is to win the Stanley Cup. Billy Guerin is fun, charming, great interview on the radio, knowledgeable. The whole professional hockey community really likes and respects Billy Guerin. He's done a tremendous job. When the contracts are over and the millions of dollars are now available this summer and into next fall, the question really becomes if they go deeper into the playoffs pretty soon, when do the fans get tired of Billy? And when do they start to turn on this good-looking, charming, fun fellow that you guys enjoy, and you're so nice when you interview him, and he really knows the business.
It sounds like
he
a
really
question
does
we
well,
should
but-
ask you.
Yeah, because we want to win a Stanley Cup. First round, leaving in the first round is just not acceptable. It's just why?
No, hey, look, I agree with you. I would hope that he knows that. If he ever thumbs through the Twitter and the comment section on articles, he would definitely know that that there's a fatigue here. The check is due. To Anthony's point, opening night, it's no longer, there's no excuses anymore. Now, I am trying to warn fans that that right now it's not like they have $60 million and they there's other teams that are closer to that being that perennial contender. There are teams with better cap situations still, but there's no more excuses. And that at some point here he's got to deliver. There was a plan here when he bought out these two players. The plan now is at that point where it's expired, and he's got to turn this team into a contender. Because you're right. I mean, I don't want to go on a rant here about how absolutely pedestrian this organization has been, but next year is the 20th.
We like your rant.
Well, next year is the 25th season of this organization. It's ridiculous that this team has won one division title 17 years ago in a division that doesn't exist anymore. At some point, you've got to
in Las Vegas
show these loyal fans.
Las Vegas came into the league. And
I mean, different rules.
How
and
many
all that
years?
Stuff. Yeah,
right.
Yeah.
Well,
but that's Apple. That is for $600 million rights fee, expansion fee. Gary Bettman essentially delivered them rules that would make it very, very.
It was almost
appetizing.
Impossible for them not to contend.
Right.
And they happened
now,
to.
did anybody expect them to go to the final the first year and win it
And
in
they,
a year?
they
Whatever,
also look at the division into which they came. At that time, the California teams were all going downhill. The teams in the western part of Canada were certainly not perennial contenders at that point. Where Minnesota's in a division with Colorado and Dallas and Chicago in the 10 years ago, where they were at the absolute peak.
Yeah.
It's a little bit of a different path. But I think that if you look at the way Billy has structured the roster right now, there's a lot of good contracts. If you just look at the contract, is this guy worth this price? He's got a lot of guys, so he's well positioned to fill in around that. But I think it has to be, and I'm not saying they have to win the cup next year or even win a round, because there's a lot of things that can happen that are beyond your control. But they've got to be,
especially in this playoff format where you're most likely playing,
you're going to
Colorado, Dallas,
Colorado or
Winnipeg
Dallas in the first round, and you could be a really good team. But that's why the way I define it is You got to go into the season as one of the 5 in the West that is looked at as a legit contender. You got to go into the playoffs as one of the 5 that people are saying they could legitimately win it. And if that's the case, if the pucks don't go your way, I'm not saying that you could say that every year, but on a 1-year spot, if let's say they go into the playoffs next year as the 2 team in the Central and they get beat by Dallas in the first round, that doesn't mean that his plan failed. It just means they lost a playoff series to another contender. But if it happens 2, 3, 4 years in a row, now you got to say, hey, wait, the plan didn't work.
So I'll leave, but for all of the fans, this first round and out is really not very satisfying.
I wish Billy was here because he and I have gotten into some brawls and press conferences about exactly what you're saying. I'm totally with you. Like, I've covered this team now. This is year 20. Like, it's tiresome. I totally am with you. But to Anthony's point too, like if the season ended today, Dallas is playing Colorado in the first round. Colorado just traded for Ryan Lindgren, Martin Necas, Jack Drury, Charlie Coyle, and Brock Nelson. It might lose to Dallas in the first round.
Both those teams, Dallas and Colorado, are among what you would say these are one of the 5 that could win the West. One of them is going to be out in the first round.
Yeah.
That doesn't make their season a failure.
Right.
It doesn't mean their plan was flawed. It doesn't mean that their GM should be fired. They got beat by another one of the contenders. Right. It's a tough playoff path through the West right now, especially
but
through the Central.
I do think that I think the fans matter. They're the most important thing when it comes to any professional sport. And I do think that the organization needs to start feeling that pressure. Like, it's enough is enough. It's 25 years here, and they've got one freaking embarrassing banner hanging up there.
Well, the banner's not embarrassing.
But I mean, you get
it's
my point.
Embarrassing that they only have one.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. Right?
But
there just comes a point where you got to freaking deliver.
Right, I know. And this could be a topic for a show that we could do an entire show on it because I also
next
think
live show.
When you go
by
back,
the way, we're pay attention. We're going to have 2 in April. We just don't know the
or
dates
you come to Spain with us. We'll argue about it for a week and a half in Spain.
DefineDestinations.com. It's actually.
But all I was going to say
that.
is when you look back over this 15-year span where they've been in the playoffs every year but 2, and I always go back and look at it and say they've really only lost maybe 2 series out of all of them that they've lost where you would say they were the better team going into the series. And, maybe 1 or 2 others where it was pretty close. But most of the time, I mean, they caught the Hawks 3 years in a row when they were absolutely at the top. They caught Colorado when they were at the top. They caught Dallas when they were absolutely loaded. There's just been some seasons where they caught Winnipeg the year Winnipeg went to the conference final. I mean, it was just they haven't gone into these playoffs very often as, okay, now this is the year we're coming.
One year that was really disappointing was St. Louis. Was it
right?
Payarvi that scored the overtime winner?
Yeah, when the game won, the shots were like 48-20, and they got beaten overtime.
Yeah. Oh my! I still remember it was a game. The one game where Jaden Schwartz just went in over the blue line, scored from like the top of the circles.
Yeah, remember it was the Wild gave up 1 lousy goal in every game of that series, lost in 5.
Yeah. All right, last question, or we got to pay Anthony overtime.
All right, I'll close us out. A question for the optimist and one for the pessimist here as we wrap things up.
The realist.
I'm the realist. He's the pessimist.
Give me a break. Yep. Oh my God.
What have I said that's not a realist?
Everything. Almost everything that you ever say is just borderline delusional, like your jinxes aren't real stuff, which I continually approve or is wrong.
Based on what both of you have seen this year, Anthony, who's the player that has exceeded your expectations the most? And then for Michael here, who's the player that has kind of fallen below your expectation?
Next.
Exceeded expectations. Gaudreau's had a big bounce back year. To me, he's just looked like the player he was 2 years ago. I think last year was more of the aberration. I think Rossi continues to make strides. Zuccarello amazes at his age what he's been able to do. I don't really know that there's a guy, and that's probably why they're sitting where they are right now, is I don't think there's a guy that has just by far exceeded what you would have expected coming into the season. Really, I can't think of.
Foligno's had a really good year.
He has, but again, he's kind of looked like he did 2 years ago.
Yeah. I don't think people realize, like, unless you really dig into the numbers, like how good he's been, and he's been such a leader on this team.
Who I think's been better than I expected is Gus.
Yeah,
I had my concerns about Gus coming into the year, and he's had a couple blips, but he's been much better coming into this season than I would have guessed. I really thought coming into the year that, it doesn't seem like we thought coming into this season, Jesper Wallstedt was going to play 20 games for this team this year, and we haven't heard his name largely because of how good Gus has been.
Yeah. It looks like Wallstedt's starting to play better in Iowa, too, which is a good thing, too. Thanks for the question. Thanks for everybody coming on out. Again, pay attention to the Talk North and the Russo Hockey and the Anthony LaPanta social media to find out when our 2 live shows are in April. We're going to try to do one that right when we get back from the New York road trip, and then we're hoping, but part of it is because of the playoff schedule, we don't know yet when we're going to be able to book it, but we're hoping to do one right before the playoffs begin, but we don't know yet if that's possible. Again, March 20th at Insight Brewing, the Wooden Sticks podcast with Kevin Gorg at 7 p.m. I'll be a guest there, and maybe Anthony and I will record our podcast there.
I'll just put a
since we're there, we'll just
put a recorder on the table, and we'll call it good.
We'll just have, since Alex is there, we'll just make him produce it like it's a normal show.
You can record 2 at the same time, right?
And then the Talk North Sports Report live show is March 26th, the Parlay Kitchen and Bar. That's also at 7 p.m. Mark Rosen will be hosting it, and he'll be sitting down with John Krasinski, Lavelle E. Neal, the third, Jim Suhan, and myself. So thanks to everybody for coming on out. Thanks to our incredible sponsors and for joining us here at Elsie's at the Aquarius Home Services studio. Aquarius Home Services, your local authorized dealer for Connecticut water treatment systems, heating, cooling, plumbing, absolutely everything. Royal Credit Union, Twill and the Edina Galleria, Feller's Ranch, Giggly THC Drinks, On X Maps, and Clamshell Beach Resorts. Thanks everybody for coming on out.
Thank you very much.
So much coming out, there's nothing going in. I know that you feel like you're never gonna win. Oh, but the world